It's like everybody rings the doorbell before they come in.
And I try to catch it before it starts beeping every time, but it's really hard. And for those of us who are applying for our medical track CEUs credits, again, this is an approved session from the Ohio Nurses Association. But of course, you need to fill out and submit your evaluation forms. I will put the direct link in the chat at the end of the session as well, but you can see the website here for the evaluation.
Well, it is the top of the hour, so we can get started here. I'm sure folks, continuing to trickle in that waiting room. My name is Becky. I'll be the host for today's session. I am at the Good Times Project over or up in Seattle, Washington, depending on where you are. It's my pleasure to host Dr. Mike this morning. For me, maybe almost this afternoon for you. Dr. Mike will be providing a COCA-I research update, so hopefully everyone is in the session that they intended to log into. Dr. Mike has a long and very accomplished career in the pediatric oncology field. I'm sure we're all somewhat aware of his great accomplishments. Literally too much to mention. Dr. Mike, your bio was so long, I had to shorten it. Within oncology camping, though, he has been extensively involved with Camp Okaizu and has served as medical director and a member of the board of directors for the Okaizu Foundation. He's also been very involved with COCA-I for many years, serving as president from 2016 to 2018. And then lastly, I just want to call out that because of his attention and dedication to siblings, our pediatric oncology programs over the years have increasingly included siblings and families based on the findings that Dr. Mike has contributed. And as a sibling myself, I am extra thankful for that research and contributions. Dr. Mike might mention this in a minute, but he's hoping for this session to be definitely somewhat interactive. So if you do have any questions that you want to pop in the chat, we will be monitoring that, but feel free to unmute yourself and speak up as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Mike.
Thank you very much. And good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. On my screen, there's no image in my little box. Can you guys still see me? Okay, perfect.
You're frozen for me, but it might catch up in a minute.
Well, maybe that's why. Hopefully that will not become a big problem. Anyway, I'm very glad to see all of you here this morning. And basically, as Becky said, what I would like to do is really make this an interactive conversation and go through some of the research that is happening or is being planned and get some feedback, and then talk about things that you all would like to do and how we can collaborate together to make that happen. As we've talked about before in this kind of meeting, all of those of us who spend much time at a pediatric oncology camp with whatever group we're working with, whether it's patients, siblings, parents, bereaved families, we can see in the moment the impact that it's having on them. We can hear them tell us all the time how important it is to them. And when we have the campers who keep coming back year after year after year as volunteers, they can tell us and show us how that impact spills over into their adult life and the contributions that they make to the world. And so we know that what we do is not only a whole lot of fun for these kids and families who deserve every bit of help they can get, but also it is important. And Bob Ditter mentioned yesterday, as I've been saying for years, that camp should be a prescribed part of the treatment plan for every family that's impacted by pediatric cancer. And we do now also have the additional advantage that the psychosocial standards of care, which were published in December of 2015, include a lot of things that medical treatment centers really can't do very well by themselves in terms of social integration, ongoing social and emotional support, and including siblings and other family members as well as patients in that trajectory of care. So I think that we should be able to find a way to position ourselves as community partners to the medical centers that we work with to help them to comply with those psychosocial standards. Now, one of the problems at this point is that those standards exist in published form. A lot of people have read them, a lot of people have paid lip service to it, but there's no way of holding institutions accountable for whether or not they're really meeting those guidelines. So the other thing that I've tried to do a little bit, and anybody that can join in that effort would be most welcome, is to introduce the concept in the Children's Oncology Group that they should include among the guidelines for institutions that are allowed to participate and enroll patients on COG protocols, that they need to have some mechanism in place for meeting those psychosocial standards of care, as well as being able to deliver the physical medical aspect of care. So that's sort of, from my perspective, that's the big picture, that we should be able to get ourselves in a position where we have documented the impact of what we do at a sufficient academic peer-reviewed level that it is generally accepted by the pediatric oncology medical community that what we do is a part of their responsibility for caring for their patients and families. So,
Dr. Mike, if I interrupt, so your camera has not come back on. Would you mind just attempting to don't leave, but just shut your camera off, hit the stop video button, and then restart your video, just in hopes that it'll pop up?
I can do that. Cannot start video. That wasn't helpful.
Yeah.
Let me unselect the device and reselect it. See if that helps. Huh.
Gotta love technology.
Yes. Apparently my camera decided that it doesn't want to work anymore, and I don't know what else I can do about that.
I'll see if I can fix something on my end, if you want to just keep on continuing. At least we can definitely hear you. And can you see everybody?
I can. Yeah, I can see everybody fine. The other thing I was looking for, I could try to switch the audio to my phone so that I wouldn't be competing for bandwidth.
Okay.
So let's see. Let me just try that. I'll try to do it quickly so that we don't waste any more time.
While you're doing it, just for fun, show of hands, who else has had this kind of thing happen while they were doing virtual camp or some other meetings, right? I think you're in good company. I think we all have experienced our technical difficulties over this year.
And it always seems to happen at the worst times.
I love too how, when we're working with campers, for the most part, they just totally roll with it. They're like, okay, whatever. They're used to it too.
Okay. So, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can still hear you.
So I'm on the phone for audio. Let me try to start the video again. It still says it can't start the video camera, so that didn't work. But at least if you can still hear me, I'll be able to talk with anonymity. So let's see, make sure I can still share my screen appropriately. So my theory was that we could, this really just is a list of things that I would like to touch on during the session, and then anything else, obviously at the bottom, any other ideas and questions. And I would like it, as Becky said, to be an interactive session. So anytime you have a question or a comment, please feel free to unmute yourself and join right in. I'd like this to be a discussion and not a lecture. And just wanted to update you on some of the things that are happening, and would welcome any comments during those, and then talk about things that people are interested and excited to do going forward. Maybe we can even find some people who are willing to take the lead on some of these things and try to get them going. So the first thing on the list says SC Camp, SCAMP, Study in the Family Camp Environment. So we've talked about this before, and let me move us back to gallery view. Some of you may be familiar with the SCIP program, Surviving Cancer Competently, that Melissa Alderfer developed at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, which is a family program. It was originally designed as a one-day in-person, in the hospital event where all family members participated, and they had some groups where they were all together and some groups where they were separated, moms and dads separately, patients and siblings separately. And it was designed to give them skills to help them cope with what the cancer experience was doing to them, and provide them with a supportive environment to do that in by sharing that with other people who were in the same circumstance. And it has been studied and published and is an accepted sort of intervention that has been vetted as having some impact. So our original goal with this study was to see if we could adapt that to the family camp weekend environment and take pieces of that intervention and sort of intersperse them over the course of a weekend, as opposed to having it a 6-hour, one-day session, and see, the presumption was that perhaps in that very supportive environment of a family camp, that the additional sort of peer support and the informal interactions going on throughout the entire weekend, along with the recreational part of camp that makes it fun and makes everybody in a better mood, might increase the impact that that program had in the camp environment. And we were just at the point we were supposed to start piloting some of those pieces at COCA-I Zoo this spring when COVID came along. So we have shifted gears with that study and are trying to develop some online virtual modules that could still be incorporated into either a freestanding online program that camps could participate in, and we could do that either as a single camp virtual program that was sponsored only by your camp. We could make them available to people who could sign up from a variety of different camps. There's different ways that we could use that. But our goal is hopefully by next spring to be able to have this available as an online program. And again, we'll do some piloting in the spring with some small groups. I may be asking some of you if you would be interested in participating in that, and then hopefully rolling it out as a program that will be available to any COCA camp to use either by themselves as a program they can offer to their families, or for maybe COCA as an organization to sponsor it certain times during the year and allow any camps to sort of disseminate that to their families so that they could choose to participate. We also are still planning, when the world allows us to get back to in-person camp, to go ahead with the plan that we already had in place to make it part of a typical family camp environment and see what that looks like as well. But again, the goal is to try to make resources available to families in a setting where they will be able to enjoy and be engaged and maximally benefit from them, and then to demonstrate that in a rigorous academic way so that we can publish it and convince our academic medical colleagues that they should endorse the concept and endorse the camps that are delivering that. So that's the quick update of where we are. Any comments, questions that anybody would like to offer at this point about that? All right, so let's go back. And our second topic on the list is again an ongoing sibling needs assessment. And I expect that people in most of your camps should have heard from Lauren Quast or one of the people that's working with her about a questionnaire that they are trying to get as many camps to participate in as possible that looks at what is available for siblings in our camp universe, what camps are able to do and what they would like to do. So if you're not doing any sibling programming, would you like to? What are the barriers? Is it money? Is it space? Is it interest on the part of your board? What are the issues that people face? And so the ultimate outcome is to come up with a picture of what different sibling support resources are available in the COCA community, what things camps would like to offer that they are currently not offering, and what are the barriers that are preventing them from doing that, that would lead to some kind of resource support that would try to provide some of the resources to these camps that would like to do something that they're unable to do, or at least give them ideas for how they can go out and get the support that they need to do that. As Becky also mentioned at the beginning, that the number of camps that are offering siblings programs of various kinds has grown tremendously over the years. I personally think that the sibling needs in some ways are, at least by virtue of the fact that they are unattended to, should be a very high priority in our community. We're trying to support the whole families, and the hospitals do have much more contact with the patients that are undergoing treatment, especially see social workers frequently, child life people frequently. The families are assessed and asked how things are going, what are the issues that your child is having. There are school intervention supports through many hospitals, and so the patients have a lot of supports that are available to them, and the SIBs are usually just mostly left out. They feel just as set apart from their social networks. They feel like they don't fit in. There's something going on with them in their lives that nobody understands. They can't talk to their peers at school about it. And so anything that we can do to support those kids, I think definitely will have long-term impact on the adults that they turn out to be. And those of you who do have SIBS programs, I'm sure can vouch for the experience that I've had, that many of our sibling graduates become incredibly valuable members of our camp communities because they really are forced from a very early age to be supportive of other people, to put their own needs second to someone else's, and to be empathetic and sympathetic in situations. And so they have a natural inclination to want to be helping. Many of them go into nursing and social work and medicine and child life and other things because they've seen the joy of being able to help someone else out who is in a difficult situation. So again, that's sort of the quick update of what's going on there. How many of you recognize this study and have talked to Lauren or one of her people from the SPARK program? I see a couple of hands up out there. Great. So I would encourage any of you who hear from her who don't know who she is or what she's doing to respond positively to that, because we're hoping to get as comprehensive a survey of the sibling resources within COCA as we can. Any questions or comments? All right, so jumping back to our list. And so far, this is much more me talking than I wanted it to be. So try to think of some things that you might want to be saying. The next thing also we've talked about before, the Camp Impact Oversample Study. I shared more information about this at the last COCA conference, but ACA did a sample that, or a study that was designed to look at the longer term impact of a child's camp experience. So they interviewed young adults between 18 and 25 who had been campers as kids for at least 3 weeks. And they asked them about a whole variety of life skills and where they learned those things. And they included, in addition to camp, school, work, family, employment, sports, different other kinds of things that kids do that contribute to their development, particularly in the sort of social emotional skill arena. And then they asked them to rate each of there were, I think, 18 different domains that they looked at, many of which will be very familiar to you: responsibility, teamwork, independence, confidence, all of the things that we expect our kids to gain from the camp experience. And they asked, what would you pick out as the single most important place where you learned this skill? And so they would choose from among these 6 different things: camp, school, church, family, employment, sports, which was the key thing. And so they found, that kids chose a variety, or these young adults chose a variety of different places as the primary place where they learned these skills, and that camp showed up in a significant percentage of the reporters and a significant percentage of the skills as the primary for, different percentages of people depending upon what it was. So we asked them if we could collaborate with them to do an oversample that focused specifically on oncology camps, because they were just looking at ACA camps in general. And we administered exactly the same survey instruments to that same demographic group from a sample of COCA camps that chose to participate. And the graphs of what was the primary source attributed to learning a large variety of these skills looked much more different than this general camp setting than I expected them to. And while in the ACA survey in general, camp would show up as 30% chose it as primary, 20%, 40%, it would vary, and the curves showed lots of other things being rated high on the list as well. And among our participants in this oversample study, camp was over 90% in a lot of them, and it was much more highly rated than as a single source for almost all of the attributes that were being measured than in this large sample of general camps in the country, which was very striking. And my hypothesis around that is that because our kids, both the patients and the siblings, feel so out of place in so many of the other places that kids get that kind of support, and if you don't feel supported and welcomed and like you belong, then it's going to be difficult for you to learn. And so we all hear kids tell us every summer, this is the only place where I feel like I can be myself. This is a second home for me. This is a second family for me. This is where I can express my feelings without worrying about being judged. And that seems to be a really powerful force in their lives. And so I would like to follow up on that. I'm working on a manuscript. COVID and all of the crazy things that have been going on this year have kind of got me off track on that a little bit. And it's not yet submitted, but hopefully will be soon, of that preliminary study. But I think we should be able to build on that. And what I would love to be able to do is to really develop a longitudinal study where we start following kids when they are maybe 11 or 12, follow them through the latter years of their camp experience and into young adulthood, which would be a big deal and a difficult and potentially expensive study to do, but would have much more academic credibility in terms of looking at outcomes than getting a sort of self-selected sample of people who choose to participate in the study, because it might be that it's just the ones who feel that camp was most important who are most incentivized to participate in the study. And so if we just selected a group of kids at random at a young age when they were still campers and followed all of them out, then we could make a much stronger argument that the results that we saw in this oversample study were generalizable to the population. And that would be a much more powerful statement. And we would need to have a lot of people helping us and participating in that. We would want to make it as broad a sample from as many camps, as many different geographic areas, as many sort of ethnically and economically diverse camper families who are participating as possible to add to the power of that outcome. So that's something that I'm really excited about, and I hope that many of you might be excited about that concept as well, because it'll take a lot of people to pull it off. So again, I would encourage comments and questions.
I have a quick question as far as just the oversample study in general. I'm guessing that Can't Make a Dream didn't sign up to be part of the particular study because it sounds like I would have known, or one of my coworkers would have mentioned if we were part of that. But we do have questions on our application that are kind of aimed at this same type of thing, you know, kind of measure these different measurements that we don't really, we're kind of gathering the information, but we haven't really done anything with it. Is there a set, like core 5 or 6 questions that we should all be asking on our applications that then can be used for this type of study?
Well, that's an excellent question, and that would certainly be one of the places that we could start, is just trying to create some uniformity in the information that we gathered from our campers, either on the application or most camps, I think, do post-camp surveys as well to try to get feedback about, you know, what was good, what was not as good, what could be better. And the more we can standardize that, then we'll be able to build a database that then people can come in and look at and ask a whole bunch of different questions. So I think that's an excellent point. And I would love for us to be able to work toward developing that kind of standardization. And obviously every camp will have their own individual questions that they ask as well. But if we could agree on a sort of a standard core, then that we could create a very valuable database that people could look at. And one of the mechanisms that I've discovered is relatively easy to use. If you have that kind of a resource, then there are always graduate students who are looking to write a master's thesis or a doctoral thesis, and they need something to study. And if you've got pre-existing data for them to analyze, then it adds tremendously to you know, the project that they're trying to work on for their educational process. And so there are people out there who can help us with this kind of things if we have certain resources we can offer to them.
So Mike, this is Tammy. Do you, for looking at like this longitudinal study and the stuff that you've done in the past, what kind of funding source have you used for paying for all of this? And I'm just curious, you know, if we were to put together some kind of COCA-wide longitudinal study, if you've, you know, looked at grant submissions or anything like that.
Well, that obviously is always a huge question, and we'd need, I think it would have to be a multi-step process, because we'd have to sort of generate some results that would show credibility, that we were capable of doing the study. We'd need to have partners who had the connections, and we'd need to have a team that included, you know, the statisticians and people who were familiar with, it's not really a clinical trial, but with the sort of psychosocial quality of life and outcomes kinds of studies. And we have a lot of people in our network who do those, are involved in those activities at their home institutions, and could certainly develop collaborations that would help us with that. But we've gotten small grants from different places to support some of the work that we've done so far, but we have not tried yet to really do this kind of comprehensive long-term longitudinal study that would be really expensive. And would have to be, you know, we'd need to be looking to NIH or the American Cancer Society or maybe Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation, you know, organizations, St. Baldrick's would be another one. Depending on the level and the amount of money that we needed and how complex and extensive the results that we were looking to get were, those would be the kinds of organizations that I think ultimately we'd be able to look to. And St. Baldrick's and Alex's are obviously a little bit easier bar than NIH or ACS. But I think that we have enough people within our network, and we have the capability to add people to the team that we could easily present ourselves as a group very capable of doing this kind of a study if we had done, you know, some more of the kind of pilot work that we've already done.
Well, and it seems like, you know, perhaps with some of the foundation grants that you could get to work on getting the pilot data or feasibility data going forward. And then I don't know if you've looked at like the PROMISE group, looking at patient-related outcomes.
Yes.
Because they sometimes are a little bit less, or a little bit easier for this kind of research than going through NIH. But I mean, NCI is a little bit difficult sometimes to get through to find out exactly who's working on this kind of research. They tend to do more like symptom management and stuff, but I'm happy to try to look through NCI contacts and see, you know, what other things are available. But it would be good to check out the PROMIS stuff and see if maybe that's something that we could apply for in the future.
Absolutely. And those are the kinds of things that we really need to develop a team of people who are not only interested, but are willing to commit time and effort to making some of these things happen. We need to do these pilot studies. We need to get people on board, show that we're capable of getting results. And then the credibility grows with time, and we can move up that ladder as we develop that expertise. So some of all of your faces that I see out there, hopefully, are people who will be willing to become more involved, or know people either in your camp organizations or at the treatment centers that refer to you, that you have relationships with, who would be interested in these kinds of studies. Anybody else? All right, let's move on.
And just really quick, going back to the sibling study of the last bullet point, Susie's wondering if you would be able to provide the contact information for that sibling specific study.
That's an excellent idea, and I can certainly provide it to Don and Jennifer. They probably actually already have it. They know Lauren, and they know that she's doing the study. We actually gave them a little bit of money through our Northwestern Mutual grant to support it. So you can get it from Don and Jennifer. Maybe that's the easiest way, instead of me trying to be the intermediary. And Lauren Quast, Q-W-A-S-T, is the person who is leading that effort. And she would be delighted if people called her up, because she's been calling camps and trying to get people to participate, and she's continuing to do that. But anybody who's interested, she'll be delighted to include you.
Wonderful, thank you.
So the next item on my agenda was sibling virtual resource development, and that's really part of you know, what we hope to grow from the sibling needs assessment in part. But there is a group that many of you may have heard of called SPARC, the Sibling Partnership for Advocacy, Research, and Care in Childhood Cancer. Melissa Alderfer is one of the principals. It's an organization that has existed for probably almost 20 years now. It initially was associated with the Super Sibs organization that some of you also may be familiar with, that offer sort of mailed and virtual things for siblings that many of our treatment centers participating in. But there's a group that includes some of these graduate students who are very anxious to find projects that they can work on, that are looking at developing both sort of webinar type resources, and then some just sort of video resources of groups of siblings talking about their life in the context of having a brother or sister with cancer, how that impacts them, that could be used either by camp organizations or hospital organizations or local community support groups, whatever, to help make resources and connections more available for siblings. And so if you have resources or have ideas of things you'd like to have that you haven't been able to find, I can get those ideas to a group of people who are actively working on that right now through this SPARC organization. I know there's a video called Siblings Speak Out that was made in the 80s at Denver Children's Hospital, and we've been using it for a long, long time with our sibling discussion and support groups. And the things that those kids say are just as true now as they were in the 80s, but the whole visual impact of a video that was made that long ago is very distracting, and the lighting is not good, and you know, all of the hairdos are those puffy, lots of curler hairdos on the women, and the slicked back Brill cream on some of the men, and the clothes that they wear are not what we'd expect to see now. So a remake of that that looked more up to date, that the kids could relate to more easily, I think would be very valuable. And there are lots of other similar kinds of things that we could come up with. And then I'd like, I think, to open the next part of the discussion by just looking at this list of things that we've already talked about to some extent, either just now or in past years, and find out who out there is really interested in any of these ideas and might be willing to be on a group to help really start to work on them. And so one of them, Sally and I have talked a lot about, as well as some other people, the impact of the camp experience on the healthcare providers. Because I think that all of us, when we are at camp, we see our patients and families in a very different way, and they begin to see us in a very different way. It humanizes that relationship to a major extent. The next time you see that child in the clinic, it's a much more relaxed setting. They know that you are a human being and not just a technocrat. They know that you're on their side. And I think that that can go a long way toward helping to mitigate the risk of burnout that people who work in pediatric oncology have to a significant extent, that it shows you the benefit in a very real and tangible way that of what you do, and particularly for the nurses who are inpatient nurses, they only see the patients when they're terrified at the initial diagnosis time, when they're in the hospital throwing up and feeling miserable because they're getting chemotherapy, or when they're just being separated from everything by having to be hospitalized again for fever and neutropenia, or when the fear comes back with something that looks like it might be a relapse. And so those nurses are dealing with these families when they're at their maximal stress and seeing them undergo the worst parts of the cancer experience. And for the inpatient nurses in particular, the opportunity to be outside playing with some of these kids that you just spend most of your time holding an emesis basin for them really can have huge impact. And it's true for everybody, you know, for the social workers, child life workers, the docs, the nurses, all of the people who help us to provide the health care at our camps, I think really benefit from it, and they know that, but the world in general doesn't know that. And so to come up, Sally has already done some studies with nurses, and if we could find some ways to generalize that to include other types of professionals as well, and again, to design a study that would have more impact from the academician's perspective, that they would see as a well-designed study that they could count on the results to be valid. Then we can go back to our hospitals and say, if we can reduce burnout in your medical providers, that's going to save you money, because all of the new people you need to hire and the time and energy you need to spend training them, those are resources that you could be putting somewhere else if your care providers were happier in their jobs and stayed with you for a longer period of time. And that will make them more willing to let some of those professionals come to camp to help us out. Because, I mean, it was not that many years ago that all of our hospitals used to pay a nurse to come for a week of camp. And now they won't even let them take vacation time to do it. So it's become much more difficult to recruit medical professionals as the model of care delivery has moved more in the direction of the green eye shades and trying to save everybody money. And if we can come up with some real data to show that it would benefit the hospital to allow their staff to participate with us, that might make that job much easier. The longer-term impact study is the one that I already talked about, either related to the ACA study or some similar design that would show how kids carry the lessons that they learn from camp into their adult lives. Bereavement is another area that I'm very interested in, and again, from the point of view of a hospital practitioner, at the time that a patient dies, then that support system that the family, is particularly the parents and the child who's ill, has relied on for so long to help them with everything disappears with their child. And many hospitals now have an annual day of remembrance or something, and the social workers do try to send cards on birthdays and reach out in ways that they can. But it still is a double-ended loss because, you know, they've become so close and so dependent upon that support system in the hospital, and it all goes away. And a camp organization is the perfect organization in many ways to be able to provide that support, because you already know the families, they're already part of your community, and so it's an ongoing support service as opposed to, you know, referring them to some 12-week grief support seminar or you know, whatever other, there are resources in the community, but you have unique opportunities as an organization that already has a relationship with the family to provide a kind of support that is much more valuable, much more impactful. That also, I think, we should try to measure. And then many of us deliver our sibling programs in different ways. Some offer a full week of camp the same as the patients get. Sometimes the siblings and the patients are there at the same time. Sometimes they're separated for some of the activities. Sometimes they do everything together. Sometimes the siblings are completely at a different time and space than the patients are. Sometimes they have a weekend program as opposed to a week, or other different kinds of things. And so I would like to be able to find some ways of looking at the impact of what we do, what is most impactful, what do the siblings really need, so that we can maximize the impact that we have within the resource kit that we have. Not everybody has the time or the space or the money to be able to offer everything that they would like to. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of the different models of sibling support that are out there that we can choose from? And then obviously other ideas and questions is very general. So what I'd like to do now is turn off this slide for the duration of our time and just spend some time talking about those ideas or any other ideas that any of you have, and what you think about them, what you'd be interested in working with, what questions you might have about how they would work, and how you could participate. That's your cue to start talking.
Dr. Mike, could you clarify on the impact to the camp for the healthcare providers? Would that kind of start a focus on those camps who have a hospital affiliation? Because we do not. So our nurses are not necessarily the nurses in the hospital setting for our campers. You know, they may, so they're going to have their own patients, and then they come to camp and are involved with a different set of kids. So are you looking more for that nurse who has that consistent relationship, or healthcare provider?
Well, from my perspective, and you know, anybody else, please jump in on this. I think that the impact is probably different for healthcare providers who are at camp with their own patients than for people who volunteer to help at a camp that deals with children with cancer. But the impact is probably positive in both cases. I think we need to be careful to design a study that looked for the kind of information we'd want to get about whatever population we chose to study. And maybe you do two different studies, one about the treatment centers that had a direct relationship with the camp and were providing the health care for their own patients, and another one perhaps for camps that utilize community healthcare providers who are willing to spend some time volunteering to help their organizations and to help those kids. Because another part of that equation is the other volunteers, you know, the counselors and program directors and other people who are there. They benefit as well. They've been on that list previously, and I think I must have just had a little brain freeze when I was typing up that list. I didn't include that, but many of our volunteers, whether they're former campers or whether they're just college kids who are looking for something good to do during the summer, they also, at the end of their week, we have this closing ceremonial that we call Inspiration at the end of the week, where everyone in the camp community has the opportunity, if they choose to go up on the stage and say something. And many of those college kids who sort of thought that they knew all the answers and had their lives all put together and had a path that they knew was the one that they were going to be taking, they say that that week that they spent at camp was transformational, and that they've completely reevaluated their professional and social and whatever other kinds of goals in life, and are going to take a completely different path. And so, you know, these kinds of programs have a huge impact on everybody that's associated with them. And depending on the specific circumstances, it might be different for different populations. But I think it would be just as valid to look at the medical staff who are not affiliated with a treatment center and are just there during camp time and have other kinds of patients at the other time. But I think we'd get some particularly impactful information that might help us, those of us who are trying to recruit medical support from specific treatment centers, if we had a message that we could bring to them that said, this is going to save you money, it's in your best interest as well as ours, that would be really helpful. So both can be done. The answers would be a little bit different perhaps, and we need to design a study that took that into account. Sally, what are your thoughts about that?
I was just actually looking up so I could put in the chat the link to our published study. But yeah, we in our study that we did, we looked at nurses only at one institution at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta who had been who worked on the pediatric oncology unit. So they were all invited to be in the study. So some of them had been to camp and some of them hadn't. So that was kind of our comparison group, the ones who had been to camp versus the ones who hadn't. So yes, those nurses specifically not necessarily took care of their patients at camp, but they generally knew a lot of the patients at camp. So if that's, but I do think there's a difference between, like Dr. Mike said, someone who works in an ER in an adult hospital and experiences a pediatric oncology camp versus a pediatric oncology nurse who's practicing in that field. I think that would be different. So, but I was looking this up while he was talking. I'm going to type it in here in case somebody's interested in the study.
I think that's great, and I think that it is different. I mean, I tend to get a core group of peds oncology nurses, and then I get adult care oncology nurses, I get ER nurses, ICU nurses, everybody that wants to do it. And I think you could do one study that just talked about healthcare providers and then stratify them into different, if you ask the right questions in the study, you could stratify them and kind of see what the differences are. But I definitely think that there is, there's an impact on all of them. A lot of them, it does still help with burnout. It's just not burnout in the oncology. I mean, I have people who've worked in an ER and are just burned out from the population that they see consistently in the ER. But when they go to camp, they're like rejuvenated that they're making a difference. And so, as we all would anticipate. So I think there's a way to incorporate all of that into one study and then just analyze the data according to the groups that they fall into. And as a whole, as a comparison, it would be good.
Other thoughts? So from among the other things that were on that list, or something that you're interested that was not on that list, let me hear some ideas that you guys have got. Or Sarah, I see you out there. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you're doing and get some people excited about that.
Sure, thank you. This is so great to just learn about what you have going on here. So I'm Sarah Worzinski. I'm a nurse at Primary Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City and a graduate student. We're currently doing a study looking at adolescent siblings of children with cancer. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this afternoon, but we're really trying to understand what their social networks look like, because we know that they shift once a child is diagnosed. And so, is it grandma stepping in? Is it a neighbor? Are they still feeling like they're getting the same support from their parents? And how are they doing that? Are they connecting with them online or using social media? Or are they able to see them in person on a regular basis? And what are the types of support that they're getting from each person that are most helpful to them, or at least from their perspective? Trying to understand how their use of social media is either helping or maybe impacting their perceptions of social support. Is it decreasing? And so that's currently the study that I'm doing. But I'm currently also actually doing a study looking at social support and how it's been studied among siblings. And interestingly, And I've shared this with Dr. Mike, that camp over and over comes up as a really, really important source of social support in a variety of ways, not only information, but that validation that they get from just being and spending time with others that are going through the same thing and helping them sort of normalize and process those experiences. So just really impressed with the work that goes on in the camps. So it's providing such a great support.
It's a quiet crowd. I think it's much harder when we're all just staring at faces on a screen than when we're sitting around in a circle in a room together. But I really would be interested in hearing sort of what your thoughts and feelings are, what things you're interested in. And certainly, hopefully there's some people out there who are excited enough to want to get involved in helping to actually put something together that we can do.
So Dr. Mike, I'm from Happiness is Camping. We did a family camp in 2019 and had really awesome results. We actually planned on doubling the amount of sessions we offered in 2020, which were obviously canceled. But the state of New Jersey didn't let overnight camps run this year, but they let family camps operate. So we're kind of thinking that that's more going to be our future, at least in 2021. And I know that you talked about your study and how you're going to pick it up. Do you know any existing, research or anything on family camps that would kind of help us right now develop our next year's policies?
That's an excellent question. And there are, I can't right at this moment quote you specific studies or papers that have been published, but I know that there are a couple of things out there that that were studies that designed around the family camp model, but they don't spend a lot of time talking at great length about the specific programming ideas. They're just talking about the sort of the results and looking at it as an overall sort of experience, a peer support kind of experience. And looking at PubMed or one of those other indexes, you could find some of those papers. I'm trying to think, I can't think of anything that's looked at a specific program model. I think one of the interesting things for us about this SCAMP program was that I think that it will be the first time that that we've tried to take a validated intervention and put it into a family camp model. But the recreational programming and just the way you structure time, the informal time that the families have just talking with each other and sharing their stories, and some of the camps, including ours, have a formal time for the parents to get together for a peer support discussion of their situations, and those kinds of things I think all lend value. There's not a whole lot of literature out there. Is anybody else who has a thought about a specific thing or some papers that you might be aware of? I will try to look into that, and if I can find some specific references, I'll send them to Jennifer and Don, and we can put them up on the website.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been all over the PubMed website looking for studies, and it's more, I'm trying to find empirical data because I've noticed that when grants include hard data, it appeals to a lot more kind of right-brained people. We all have the passion of camp that appeals to the left brain, so it's just kind of the hard data that helps us develop our grants more than anything.
Absolutely, that's our challenge right now. So the more of that data that we can develop, the easier it will become going forward.
Hi, this is Deb, and I'm from Camp I Hope. I may have missed this because I'm multitasking and listening to you and working at the same time. But has there been any consideration or looking at end of life? And I know the numbers would be small, but listening to the session that talked about integrating palliative care kids into camp and how that affects their resilience. And we've had, we probably had three case studies of the same situation, looking at the benefits of keeping those kids at camp on the other campers and on their families, even long-term. I don't know how to quantify that. Like I said, maybe that would have to be more of a qualitative or a case study approach, but looking at how does that affect the resilience of both the child who is at end of life and the family going forward if they are able to have that camp experience. And if you talked about that already, I apologize.
We did not, and I think that's a really interesting question. And I think probably a lot of you out there have had the experience of a kid whose one of their last wishes was to live long enough to go back to camp one more time. You know, we have families, there's one that jumps right into my mind, the last time that the family was all together with all of the siblings, because some of them were getting older and, you know, getting ready to be more independent. And the last time they were all together as a family before their child died was at a family camp at COCA-I. And so, you know, there are lots of anecdotal stories about the power of that experience. And, you know, this is interesting also because one of our gold ribbon standard questions is about patients on palliative care, and do you allow them to come to camp, and if so, how does that work? So it's been a topic of discussion among a lot of us anyway, and you know, some people with real reasons are nervous about having kids who are that fragile in the camp setting, and if a child died at camp, how is that going to impact the rest of the population? There are a lot of questions that we need to ask ourselves, but I think that camp could be a huge part of that end-of-life care plan, and it doesn't have to be, you know, in the last few days. Palliative care, as I'm sure you well know, really just involves symptom management, and there are a lot of people now who say that the palliative care team needs to be involved with every child with cancer from the day of diagnosis, because they can make their experience less awful even if they are successfully treated and go on to live a long, happy life. So there's different ways of couching that conversation, but it is a conversation that is beginning to happen in COCA, and it would be helpful to all of us if it was a more informed conversation. So if we can study it and develop some data and learn what the impact is, what the difficulties potentially are, what the successes are, that would help to frame that conversation in a way that it could be more useful.
And maybe it would be something as simple as, well, I know it's not simple, but reaching out to all of our camps who've had those experiences and pooling those experiences at this point in time, and what they did do to meet the needs of those patients that were at their campsites.
Yeah, often the first step is just that kind of out there, what's happened, what people have done, and
right.
Where to go.
Thank you.
I don't know if all of that means that we're approaching the end of our time, but as I look at the clock, that is true, and that might be what that bell is all about. Any last comments that people want to offer? Well, I would just like to say that I am absolutely delighted to see so many people that they don't fit on my screen who have at least enough of an interest in research to show up to hear a little bit about it. I think there's a lot of potential in COCA as an organization with the resources that all of us have. When we bring those together, the power is amplified in multiple ways. And I just would love it if we could get some people really interested in doing some work and putting some things together and starting to get some results that we can publish so that we can start to build that credibility and experience that would allow us to work up to some of these more complex and more expensive long-term impact studies that we really need to, we'll have to be able to show people that we know how to do research studies and we can do it successfully in order to get that kind of funding. So thank you all very, very much.
Wonderful. And thank you so much, Dr. Mike. There's lots of chatter going on in the chat. Awesome session, Dr. Mike. You are the bomb. So thank you so much for sharing with us and kind of facilitating this discussion. And thanks to everyone for tuning in.